Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, Opie recalls meeting his wife at a restaurant where his usual charm failed. Despite initial difficulty, they clicked instantly, marrying after 9 months. On his birthday, he caught his wife cheating with his stepbrother, discreetly filming them. Revealing the betrayal at a family gathering, he calmly ended the marriage. Now healing, he's moved on, acknowledging the pain but finding peace in a new relationship. Now let's get into the story. The first time my wife and I met was at a small restaurant near my workplace. That day, I went to have lunch with one of my colleagues, and I could not ignore her sitting alone. I was used to approaching girls and sweeping them off their feet with my sweet lines, and I thought I would get lucky with my wife. But she completed the line I wanted to use on her before I did. I was impressed to see that, but it also meant she would be a tough nut to crack. And like I had predicted, she was. Instead of blushing and smiling like other women, she locked her eyes with mine, fate to smile, and continued eating her food. That was my first time being ignored like that by a woman, and it was embarrassing because everyone's eye was on us. Still, overall I found her attitude very charming and different from the rest of the women I had met. I kept talking to her without getting a response, and finally, after I tried so much, she smiled. When she smiled genuinely that time, I knew I had broken through her high walls, and with a snap of a finger, we were talking and laughing together. The conversation we had felt like we had known each other for a long time flowed freely and naturally. Despite being complete strangers, we chatted like best friends who had not seen each other in a while, and at the end of my 30-minute break, we exchanged contacts and Facebook handles. There was something I was looking out for, and when I saw that, I asked her out. I was convinced we were a perfect fit, and I didn't want to make the same mistake I made with my ex-girlfriends. Of course, she said yes, and we became inseparable. We even wore matching outfits occasionally because she thought it was sweet. We dated for 9 months before we married, and though my friends thought I was moving too fast, I didn't think there was a better time to officially make her mine. About 2 weeks before our wedding, I leased a bigger apartment, and we moved in when we returned from our honeymoon. The first year of our marriage was splendid. I had never been deeply in love like I was with my wife, so I did anything I could to make her smile every day. Before we got married, I noticed that my wife was fond of my stepbrother, and she often talked about him when we returned from our family hangout. My stepbrother was a gym instructor, and as a result of that, he was heavily built. He was also handsome and the kind of guy ladies love to be around. In the past, I had female friends who abandoned me the moment they met my stepbrother, and this mostly had to do with his looks. Since my wife had 3 older brothers and was used to being around guys, I believe she also saw him as her brother. I never suspected that her talking about his looks and how well-built he looked was subtly telling me that she was into him. I was even glad that she had a way of always bringing him into her conversations as well as her brothers. This was because I wanted our families to be one big happy family, and I didn't want her shutting out my family members, including my stepbrother. I had been with him since I was 13 and he was 17, and I didn't want anyone to come between the bond we shared. On my 28th birthday, my wife decided to throw a surprise birthday party for me at home, and she tricked me into coming home early from work that day. I had to take the family emergency excuse to leave work early, only to go home to a packed house. My parents, stepbrother, and some of my friends were there, and my wife's parents and her older brother were there too. The surprise worked, and I was so happy to see everyone at my house that evening. It was a small party with a lot to eat and drink. By this time, our marriage was already 1 year old, and we didn't have any children yet. After eating and drinking, everyone decided to hang around since they were mostly family members and close friends. It was pouring heavily outside, and no one had the excuse of going to work the next day since it was a Saturday. Everyone in the room was an adult, and in no time, We were arguing about politics and our economic crisis. The conversation grew intense as we all tried to outtalk one another, and that was when I noticed my wife was not with us. I didn't even notice when she left because she was sitting behind me, so I asked around for her. Everyone said they had not seen her until her mom casually said she had seen her walk down the corridor with my stepbrother. At first, I didn't want to go and look for them, but after some minutes and I didn't see them or hear their voices, I excused myself. Walking down the corridor, I paid attention in case I heard voices, but I didn't hear a sound. When I didn't hear a sound, I felt something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what it was. As I approached our room, I began to hear soft, muffled moans, and my heart nearly dropped in my stomach. I walked closer to our room, pressed my ear against the door, and could not believe what I heard. I was devastated and heartbroken, but I had to keep myself together. A part of me wanted to go in there and give them the beatings of their lives, but I knew it would only complicate things. So I slowly pushed the door open, and luckily they didn't hear a creak because they were so busy. I turned on my phone video recorder, recorded them, and quietly returned to the living room. About 15 minutes later, my stepbrother returned first, and some minutes later, she came in. She changed her clothes and took her bath so no one would suspect anything. When we were complete, I asked if everyone wanted to see a movie, and they all agreed. Then I told my wife to go and make popcorn for everyone. While she was making the popcorn, I transferred the video I had recorded to my flash drive so I could plug it into my large screen television. We were settled as soon as the popcorn was shared with everyone. I played the video, and though they did not understand at first, their mouths eventually fell when they watched the video. My wife and stepbrother were the most surprised ones, and they could not say anything or defend themselves. They sat there speechless. Our parents were shocked and disappointed, and none of them could say anything. They were all ashamed and expected me to react in a certain way, but I didn't. Immediately after the video ended, I asked my wife and stepbrother if they liked the movie, but they couldn't maintain eye contact. Funnily enough, it stopped pouring at the same time, but no one made an attempt to leave. When my wife could not bear the silence anymore, she started crying and begging. Her mom was so angry that she yelled at her, but she didn't stop. I went into our room and packed her things so she could leave with her parents, and eventually, she did. No one dared beg on her behalf, not even her parents. My stepbrother left before my parents, but what he had done caused a rift between us. Everyone left that day with their heads buried in shame, especially my wife, and there's no need to ask if I divorced her because I did. It was even worse because I never spoke to her again. I didn't only cut ties with her, I did with my stepbrother too, and things never remained the same in my family. It's been 2 years now, and I'm finally able to tell this story because I have been able to let go. Though it hurt a lot, and I still don't think she deserved forgiveness, I had to do it for myself. I met another woman, and we're taking things one step at a time. Today's second story. In this story, a couple newly married rented an apartment through the wife's acquaintance, supposedly the manager. The husband worked while the wife stayed home, occasionally visited by the manager. Suspicious, the husband discovers the manager is the wife's ex-lover. Confronted, she admits to an affair, prompting divorce. He sues the manager, breaking the lease. The wife, unable to secure a lease elsewhere, causes financial problems for the manager before leaving. Now let's get into the story. My wife, 28 female, and I, 35 male, rented our first apartment from someone she knew. We moved in right after our honeymoon. She told me she knew the apartment manager because he was friends with her dad. So if he was willing to rent to us for cheap, he owned 2 apartment buildings across the street from each other. They were really nice quality, just 7 minutes from downtown. We couldn't have found a better place to live in the area. I didn't ask questions. I was just happy and hopeful for our future. With this affordable rent, we were going to have money to travel and do fun things with my days off work. My wife said she was going to get a job, but she was looking and trying to figure it out for 8 months after we moved in. I was getting frustrated because of that, and because the apartment manager would come over every Monday to check on the condition of the apartment. I knew this was way too often. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but my wife said it was stated in the lease. I trusted her and let it go. I was at work every Monday anyway, so it was my wife's response to keep the house clean and put up with him. I had no idea what was really going on. On a Thursday, I was getting our mail out of our tiny locked box when the neighbor joined me. He asked me why the apartment manager visited our apartment so often. I was confused and told him the apartment manager came over every Monday to check out our apartment. He was surprised and asked me why in tarnation he had to do that when he only checked his apartment every 4 months. Instantly, I started to panic. If it wasn't for inspection, why was he visiting my wife weekly while I was at work? She was always the one communicating with him. She told me she tried to ask him if he could come a little less frequently, but he refused and reminded her that he had to follow the lease. I checked the lease and found that someone scribbled out the original type and instead wrote every Monday. I had to figure out what was going on, but I didn't want to tell my wife. I suspected her of anything. I found the apartment manager's online profile and noticed my wife's dad wasn't on his friends list. But she was on Saturday. I found the same neighbor at the mailbox. I thanked him for asking me about the landlord because I had no idea I was being lied to. He sympathized and asked me what I was going to do next. I asked his advice, so he suggested I pretend to go to work on Monday, but actually just sneak inside his apartment until the apartment manager showed up. It was perfect. I did exactly that, watching through the window until he showed up and joined my wife inside. I waited 15 minutes before I decided to go in. The neighbor wished me luck and suggested I record the whole thing. I thought that was a great idea. I walked across the street recording and quietly unlocked my door. As soon as it cracked open, I saw them having intimate in her living room on the couch my parents bought us. I rushed in, screaming. My wife threw a blanket over him and tried to ask me what I was doing back home. I could hear in her voice that her heart was pounding and she was gasping between sentences. Her hands were shaking. I asked why she had the apartment manager under a blanket. She was speechless, and that's when he decided to run butt naked, escaping out the window. He got in his car and sped away while my wife started begging me to stop recording and forget about this. She said it was the first time they tried anything, and I got there before it actually happened. I told her I wasn't stupid, that if he'd been coming over every Monday while I was at work, this was not the first time they tried anything. I just discovered their affair. She tried to say no, but she was crying and flustered just like she was guilty. She followed me around while I gathered my stuff, begging me to delete the video because it would ruin AP's life if people thought he slept with her and violated the lease. I said I'd consider it if she answered some of my questions. In desperation, she agreed to tell me the truth. AP wasn't a friend of her dance. He was her ex. She dated him for years and met me right after they broke up. He offered us cheap rent so he could try to sleep with her every Monday, but she denied him every time until today. I couldn't believe a word she said. No matter what she told me, I had to divorce her. I wouldn't trust her ever again. I believe she slept with him several times, if not every Monday. If I tried to stay with her every time I'd leave for work, I'd be sweating bullets wondering if she had another guy in our house. I told her my fears and reasoning before I said divorce and left. She followed me outside screaming for me to delete the video. It caused quite a scene. AP called me the next day to try to bribe me. He wanted me to delete the video so badly that he offered me $50,000 to do so. He added that this affair was all my wife's doing. She changed the lease, so I believed their story. I said I didn't care and pointed out that he'd have no way of knowing if I actually deleted the video from all my devices since that wouldn't work out. I sued the apartment manager for violating the Fair Housing Act. This automatically broke the lease, returning the security deposit back to me. I left my ex-wife living there without belief. She moved off AP for several months after the court hearing, forcing him even deeper into debt. She didn't have any credit to get approved for a lease in her own name, so she was eventually forced to leave, but it took a while. By the time she was forced out, he resented her because of the problems she caused him. He'll be in debt until he dies.